Good morning. We honor our guest, Professor Molly Broad, and Neil will introduce her. This is number, what is it, 16 or 17, Avi, or what? The number of the 16th meeting of this forum on higher education. Started way back in 2004, I guess. In the wake of a meeting we had on massification of higher education in Israel, and the idea was that we should get together people from all parts of the higher education system, both university, research universities and colleges, academic colleges, which is beginning of the 90s, middle 90s, started making the inroads into the higher education system. And instead you met with many of the people who are now at the top of the system, so you are well familiar with our problems and the issues which lie in front of us. And without any further comments, I will give Neil the microphone and you will introduce them.
Well, it is my privilege to introduce to you President Molly Broad of the American Council on Education. Our Higher Education Forum got its initial impetus from comment by former President Gardner of the University of California system in our conference on the transition to mass higher education. He mentioned then that the California system hadn't been designed by politicians and imposed on the institutions of higher education, but rather the politicians had demanded of the institutions of higher education that they reach understandings in direct dialogue within the higher education community. And then the understandings which were formulated between the institutions of different types were ratified by the legislature. And that was the starting off point for our decision to try to promote more communication here between the colleges and the universities. As Moti mentioned, something like 6 years have passed now, and I, as the head of the United States Israel Educational Foundation, whose mandate is to give this little American input into the Israeli policy debates, thought that the time had come again for us to hear some thoughts by a senior American higher education figure. And when I saw President Broad's bio on the internet, I thought she was the ideal candidate. As president of the University of North Carolina system, a system which is roughly equivalent in number of students to our national system, she headed a state university whose campuses vary widely, in their degree of research orientation, in their academic status. In addition, when she wanted to recapitalize her system by floating a bond issue, she had to conduct negotiations and build a united front with the North Carolina community colleges. So she has a lot of very senior, hands-on experience with exactly the sort of issues which challenge us today: how to promote dialogue, understanding, and the formulation of shared positions within the higher education sector. Today, as the head of the American Council on Education, she's the leader of an organization whose membership, I can say, starts with Harvard and Yale, runs through the middle ranks, and concludes with the community colleges. So she continues to be involved in building consensus between institutions of higher education with highly varying needs and missions, and persuading them to formulate shared positions which can be presented vis-a-vis the political system in order to block a situation in which populistic political impulses interfere with the proper functioning of the system of higher education. So with this thought in mind, President Broad was invited to Israel, and in the many conversations which we've had during the course of the week, I think her visit has already proved itself. And now I'm honored to give the floor to Molly Broad.
Just before Molly, just a second. I want to remind you, first of all, the rules of the game are, I don't know, but you have 45 minutes will be sufficient for you?
Yes. Oh, plenty.
Plenty, okay. And then we have open it for general discussion, questions. We usually carry the meeting until 1 o'clock, about 2 hours. Now, I want to remind you that the next meeting will be on the 11th of June. It's close to this one, but because of some scheduling problems we had with the people who participate, and it will tackle, by the way, one of the issues which are at the forefront now of the Israeli higher education system is the relationship between the executive boards of the universities, the people who represent the public at large, and the government, and the senates of the university, which represent, of course, the professors. So we have two representatives. To remind you, it will be Eitan Raf, the chairman of the executive committee of the Hebrew University, and on one hand, and on the other hand, we'll have Professor Tzvi Ziegler from the Technion, who heads the Inter-University Senate Committee. So it will be, I guess, a challenging, very interesting confrontation and meeting. Okay. Oh.
Can you... Shalom. So let me thank you for providing this opportunity, and particularly to express my gratitude to Neil Sherman, who has organized this trip and made it possible for me to learn a great deal about higher education in Israel, and for inviting me to speak at this event. I am following his guidance about the kinds of topics that you would be interested in. I want to tell you I'm happy either to be interrupted if I'm saying something that isn't clear, or if you have a comment, and then I really look forward to the opportunity after the slides for us to engage in an active conversation. So I understood in advance of this trip, which is my first trip to Israel, I hope not the last, I did understand that yours is a well-educated nation with a vibrant economy, and the rate of bachelor's degree attainment in Israel is competitive with many of the nations in Europe, and indeed higher than our own educational attainment in the U.S. What I think is truly astounding, however, is the creativity and the spirit of entrepreneurship that is in your workforce that has led to tremendous success in R&D, and spending on R&D capital per capita. You are a leader for sure, ranking second behind the U.S. in the number of companies listed on NASDAQ. I mean, these are statistics I'm sure you all know very well. It has been a great education for me to be prepared to talk with you. And with only 7 million people, smaller than the state of North Carolina, you attract as much venture capital as France and Germany put together. It is a very strong foundation on which you are trying to come to grips with what are the strategic directions for the future. So you start with a very impressive base, and with the kind of creativity and determination in your young people that is truly impressive. Neil asked me to talk today about how we have used system-level governance in the U.S. to harness creativity in higher ed and to provide services that respond to public needs. It has been my experience in several American university systems that the wisest kind of governance can create a really productive balance between the ambitions and the abilities and the aspirations of the faculty on the one hand, and the public needs on the other, the needs of the state for educated personnel to populate the workforce. So I'm going to begin with some essential context about U.S. higher education. I suspect from the conversation that many of you are already very well aware of the diversity within the system of higher education. I'm going to use the state of North Carolina, no surprise there, where I served as the president of that university for 9 years, as an example of how this form of multi-campus system governance works, and do some comparisons with other arrangements in the U.S. for governance. Let me just remind you then that of the diversity of American higher education, it is truly my belief that the quality of American higher education is the direct result from the diversity of our offerings and from the competition that raises the bar for everyone between and among institutions with different missions, between public and private institutions. So we have 3,400 public and not-for-profit institutions across the full array of missions, 1,100 for-profit degree-granting institutions, and about 2,200 that don't offer degrees but offer some kind of credential, and most of them are for-profit. We typically think of the taxonomy of campuses in essentially three quite broad categories: the research university, the comprehensive university, and the liberal arts college. I'm setting aside discussion of community colleges for the purposes of this conversation. But those three basic categories. The comprehensive institutions typically concentrate on undergraduate students, but they provide an array of graduate degrees, especially at the master's level, and especially in business and in law and in teacher education. The liberal arts colleges are essentially mostly private. They are small, residential experiences for the students, and they focus on the liberal arts and sciences. And I must say, in recent years in the U.S., coming from many different directions, including survey of corporate leaders about what they're looking for in their workforce from college graduates. And increasingly, the message is we know that they can't master a body of knowledge while they're in college that will last them a lifetime. What we're most interested in is their capacity for critical thinking, for ability to communicate effectively, orally and in writing, to be good problem solvers, to be familiar with the uses of information technology, to work in teams, and so forth. But a heavy notion on these liberal arts kinds of capacities that will allow us to continue effectively to learn throughout our lives, knowing that what we learned in our time in college won't be adequate to serve us for the rest of our lives. And now we are seeing these for-profit institutions growing. It is, for me, a troublesome issue. I could go into that, but even this morning's, or I guess it was last night's breaking news press from the U.S. is about private equity firms that are going in and buying struggling small private institutions that, with the recession, have not been able to keep their head above water. And then they buy these private institutions, turn them into for-profit. When they buy them, the accreditation of the institution comes with it, And the Wall Street analysts say that that accreditation is worth minimum $10 million. And then they are able to completely transform their offerings. And most of their money comes from the federal government, either from student aid or from student loans. And graduates of these institutions frequently can't get jobs that will pay them enough to pay off their student loans. So it is an issue of great trouble at the moment. And in my role as president of the American Council on Education, I have an op-ed that is about to come out in our Chronicle of Higher Education, and am pulling together a blue ribbon commission of major leaders to try to address this set of issues around accreditation. It is the linchpin for our governance structure because it is voluntary, peer-reviewed evaluation of quality. It is done by us, to us, and it is rigorous and critically important. And the notion that you could go in and buy it as a private equity firm and then transform what it does in ways that don't even begin to look like the foundation on which the accreditation was given is a very troublesome trend. And I think if you watch in the months ahead, you will see us stepping up in a strong way to stop it.
Accreditation is a periodic process, so the next time, if they do not pass, then...
Oh, you're right. But those private equity firms would be long gone, having cashed out in 3 to 5 years. And they are long gone, leaving a shell of an institution.
And the buyers are not very clever to buy at a good price if this is what they are doing. Right? It's something that...
I'm happy to talk with you about it. So what this chart shows is that public and private research universities make up a relatively small portion of American higher education. Now, their slice in terms of the numbers of institutions is small, but they represent about 30% of the enrollment in higher education. So an important part, but only a part of the 18 million students who are enrolled in higher education in the U.S. The comprehensives and liberal arts together represent an additional about 30% to a third. And then finally, we have the for-profit institutions and the significant role that is played by community colleges. So in most countries, when we refer to a system of higher education, you're thinking about a national system where there is an education ministry. That is not what we think of as systems in the U.S. Our Constitution designates that the states have responsibility for education, not the nation. We do not have an education ministry, and we would oppose any move to try to create a national ministry of education in the U.S. But each of the 50 states does it quite differently. And some of what you see in the U.S. reflects the evolution of development and the timing of the way higher education developed in our country. So for the earliest colonies and states along the eastern seaboard, and especially in New England, the dominating higher education form is private, nonprofit institutions. Think about all of those Ivy League institutions that are really populate and have the centrality of focus in, especially in the Northeast. As you go down the eastern seaboard, you begin to see public institutions being created, and the University of North Carolina is the oldest public university in America, having been established shortly after North Carolina became a state. But as you move farther west, you see a transition and an acceleration of the development of public institutions in the middle of the 19th century with the enactment of something that we call the Land Grant Act, in which the federal government gave land in each of the states for the development of public institutions of higher education. So what we have in place varies tremendously within a state, and it varies significantly between the states, and typically is the result of the evolution and development of those states. But the story is, at critical moments in the history of those states, changes have been made. So how they started out and where they stand today is an organic process of evolution, but at certain key moments, there were significant changes, strategic changes, that transformed the way higher education is delivered. So I want to talk about the University of North Carolina, and as Neil mentioned, there are 16 campuses in the university and a School of Science and Math. One of those 16 campuses is a conservatory of the performing arts, an extraordinary conservatory. There are 2 research-intensive universities that are part of it, UNC at Chapel Hill and North Carolina State. 2 emerging research universities, one in Charlotte and one in the eastern part called East Carolina. And then there are 5 historically black colleges that are part of the university, dating from the time when African American students could not be admitted to traditionally white institutions. And many of these historically black institutions are quite old and have been around for a long time. We have one campus that is historically Native American Indians, dating from the earliest days in the population of the colonies, and then an array of regional campuses. So a rich mixture. And then there's a separate community college system that has 58 institutions that pretty much cover the entire geography of North Carolina. And
just a short question.
Sure.
4 black universities you started with are still predominantly black, or are they now mixed these days?
They are dominantly black, but increasingly because of the immigration of Hispanics into North Carolina by huge percentages. North Carolina has the most rapidly growing Hispanic population, but from a very small base. And increasingly those students of color are being encouraged to attend the historically black campuses.
Why is that? I mean, is that a matter of policy?
No, not a matter of policy at all. It's a matter of choice on the part of Hispanic students, but I would tell you many of these historically black campuses are actively recruiting Hispanic students. They provide a lot of preparatory courses for students who may not be ready to do college-level work at a university. And they provide a small, nurturing environment. So there are a number of characteristics of those institutions that make them attractive places.
Is it the student body that is black and Hispanic, or also the faculty?
Both. The faculty is, you would find many white faculty, some white students, but predominantly today yet they are still comprised of students of color.
Isn't there an active policy against it? I mean, to try to mix the populations?
Oh, indeed. The policy goals of the university are to achieve this kind of diversity, and we have achieved it at the traditional white institutions. But as you might guess, when a really smart, gifted African-American student, once they could be admitted to Chapel Hill, would prefer to attend Chapel Hill than to attend the historically black institution. And so when I arrived as president there, I would have to be candid to say I found a set of historically black institutions that were in disarray, declining in quality, and I felt a serious problem that I'm happy to say we were able to step up to, and they are stronger and better today as a result of those efforts. So that pretty much describes, I should mention that there are 60-some for-profit institutions in North Carolina. It has just been amazing. Many of them are branches of the same national university, but they have branches in Charlotte or Raleigh or Durham. So for-profit institutions as well. So let me talk about the benefits of... So what happened here? Can you see the... you can't see the writing there, so I will just tell you. It looks very clear on my hard copy. I am sorry that you can't see it, but this identifies the specific benefits of having a university system as the example of North Carolina. At the broadest level, the role of state systems is to ensure that higher education confers the greatest possible benefits on the public by encouraging excellence in teaching, in research, and service, the three-part mission that I think defines American higher education, where research and teaching occur simultaneously in the same setting, and where public service or engagement or outreach also is an extension of both the research and the teaching process. A primary role for a system leader is to secure the essential resources that will allow each of the campuses that comprise it to develop and to flourish. And to be an effective advocate and a fundraiser, the system leader has to be able to make a compelling case to all these important external constituents as to why the investment and the return on that investment is of great benefit to the public. Often it's easier for a system leader to make a convincing case on behalf of higher education because he or she is not wedded to some parochial, individual institution or campus. It frees one up to be able to make the advocacy argument on behalf of the entire system of higher education. Absolutely essential to serving the public interest is the preservation of the diversity that defines us and that serves the very diverse population that exists in the U.S. One of our primary tools, and I've already referred to this, is the approval system, the determination of who may offer what new programs and how the approval to launch a new degree program occurs. And it occurs in the University of North Carolina, a very rigorous, peer-reviewed, voluntary process in which a campus will present its proposal. It will be critically assessed and reviewed by the president and by colleagues from sister institutions. This is now a well-honed process so that parochial interests don't get to interfere with judgments about quality, but when the program can justify that it serves a specific need of the state and that the faculty have the qualifications and the abilities to effectively deliver a high value-added program, then and only then is it approved to be launched. And we go through the budget. The budget is a part of the process, and there is an expectation, if this is as high a priority that they want to add this, that some portion of the budget comes from within through reallocation, and some part of it we would then advance on their behalf to the legislature. So everybody has some skin in the game, as we would put it.
And it is the President's decision to allocate
yes. Yes.
The single President at the helm.
Correct. Once it's gone through this process, then it falls to the President to find the resources to fund it, some coming from the campus, and some would be my responsibility to advocate. Now, we go through every year a process of reviewing every advanced degree program where the number of degrees conferred in any year is small. So if there's only a single-digit number of degrees that were conferred last year, and it's your turn to be critically reviewed, you have to make a strong justification, or that degree will be phased out as soon as you may not admit new students into that degree program. Yeah.
Are there voices from the individual institutions claiming that this process, having one president at the top of the whole system, that it is against academic freedom?
No.
Like in Israel. In Israel it would be considered an impingement on academic freedom of the institution.
I think we have a clear understanding about what academic freedom really is. And believe me, I have lots of scar tissue from having preserved academic freedom of the faculty to assert positions that may be unpopular to our legislature. Lots of experience with that. But we don't view these decisions that are rigorous, qualitative, collective assessments as interfering with academic freedom. Well, one might have a point worth focusing some energy to try to achieve that kind of clarification of what academic freedom is and what it is not. But it's a process that constrains unfettered ambition. And everyone in this room knows that there are members of the faculty whose ambitions and aspirations and visions fill the room, and yet there may not be enough demand for individuals that have that kind of degree to serve the workforce. And so this is the balancing act to prevent these unbridled ambitions of the faculty and to keep them in check. But it's a process that is so focused on quality that ultimately it results. It may not be a pretty process, but ultimately it results in the decisions about what are the best programs to be offered and where should they be offered.
Could you elaborate? It's not clear. The second tier, the comprehensive, and the middle offer within the university system, can they, for example, offer a degree, a PhD program? Or is it limited just to the research?
No, it's a great question. There is no prohibition of one of the regional colleges to propose to create a PhD program. It is rare that they can demonstrate both of those things, that in their region they need individuals with such skill and education, and that they have the faculty and the capacity to successfully launch a high-quality program. Very few exceptions, but I can cite one. A wonderful regional college on the Atlantic Ocean, UNC Wilmington. They developed over the years tremendously talented faculty in marine science-related work. And they had been aspiring that this would be their signature program. And they tried many times, and every time they tried, the research universities vetoed their efforts. We took that analysis apart and said, just because they're regional doesn't mean they cannot have a PhD. They have to demonstrate the quality, and we have to judge them in the same way we would judge you. And this is the only exception that comes to my mind during my time as president, in which we agreed to confer the PhD authority to this regional institution in only one field. And it has been a tremendous success story. But it is rare, but we don't say just because you're a regional institution, you cannot aspire to have a PhD program.
This is different than the UC system?
It is, and I'm going to come to that because there are benefits to the way UC did it, but this would be one of the disadvantages. So other reasons, the way it's concentrated in doctoral institutions means that we have highly productive and lower per unit costs than if we allowed a wide open proliferation that anybody that wanted to offer advanced degrees was free to do it. So it helps to promote sound financial management, and it helps us achieve not only critical mass in program quality, but economies of scale that simply cannot be achieved if all you have is 3 or 4 students a year pursuing a degree. A great example under the pressure in recent years at the University of Maryland, coming from the legislature and the governor, for them to significantly embark upon an effectiveness and efficiency initiative, did a number of things. And I want to give you a sense of the sorts of ways in which they responded. The results of their effort produced significant support from the governor and from the legislature. So they did a lot of consolidation of key services. So the University of Maryland has maybe a dozen campuses in their system. And they consolidated all of their back office operations. Instead of having separate payroll services on every single campus, they had a single system that produced the paychecks. They went to acquire information technology systems by going collectively and leveraging their scale to get a better price by doing it collectively. They did a variety of such initiatives. The faculty agreed to increase their teaching load. This was a really significant move, and so the colleges that are part of this system now offer 7 to 8 courses a year they teach, and even the research university at College Park is teaching 5 courses a year. They put a limit for the completion of the degree, the bachelor's degree, to 120 student credit hours, the way in which we measure it. Now, it's not unusual for students to go to college and end up having taken 150 or 160. They stay there 4, 5, or 6 years. In fact, moms and dads say to their children, this is going to be the best time in your life. Go there, stay as long as you want, study everything you want to. The tuition is cheap. I mean, these are middle and upper income families who are paying a fraction of the cost. Well, the University of Maryland said, no more, 120 hours, and you must have completed it. And they say 10% or 12 credit hours you must take off campus. Online, study abroad, an internship where you do service learning and write a series of research papers and reports. These are the kinds of initiatives that gain them tremendous credibility in the legislature because every part of the university stepped up to take some part. Instead of these, what is typically done is an across-the-board cut, and nobody knows what happens, but the legislature never really thinks that you've been seriously hurt. In this example, everyone stepped up to the plate and took some quite visible hurt. Another key aspect of our efforts to promote excellence is, and a role of the president is to protect the people who are trying to do the right thing that may not be popular, or it may be very innovative. And so I figured one of my most important roles was to distinguish between where I needed to provide cover or blocking so that a faculty could do something that was very important but difficult and risky, and when I shouldn't permit folks, when they were trying to take a shortcut. So making these judgments so that they are protected from opposition either within their campus or beyond when they were trying to do something important versus putting the red light up when all they were doing was trying to take a shortcut. Opposition from within the faculty, mostly. It's not the tradition. It isn't the way I learned it. I mean, all these breakthrough ideas start out being unpopular with some part of the faculty, and that's the time when the president needs to stand in protection and support of something that has potential but may also have a risk of failure. The president also can provide funds that will incentivize a campus to make important initiatives. So one of the things I did was create a pool of funds and allocate it to each campus specifically for a Center for Teaching and Learning so that faculty members could have help trying to use information technology tools in new ways, instead of everyone trying to figure it out on their own when they already had a full teaching load. These Centers for Teaching and Learning have been enormously successful. Similarly, on the research-intensive campuses, providing funding to create offices of technology transfer and to provide access to the necessary kinds of legal counsel. These are things you can do in a system that will incentivize, and I've done it with the smaller campuses to help them build their fundraising capability, because the little guys didn't have any of the apparatus. And if they tried to create those positions in fundraising, the faculty would have cried bloody murder. So if I gave them the money to do that, or I gave them a consultant, they could begin to build their own capacity to work with their alumni and to raise funds. So these are the kinds of things that you can accomplish within a system that uses all the incentive and constraint mechanisms, but to do it in a way that is completely compatible with essentially the culture of academe. I think it is one of the most important roles that I felt I played as president of the University of North Carolina. And the presidents, the chancellors of those campuses agreed. As I was leaving, one of the things that was said that means the most to me is that I invented tools for them to use to advance their own missions and their own goals and aspirations. Now, I want to turn to some of the other models that exist, and I want to go specifically in a minute to the University of California system. The first one is, of course, no system at all. Every campus has its own board. Every board is totally independent. They all make individual decisions without any coordination. It's all individual initiative. They're all effectively free agents with complete and absolute autonomy, and they bump into one another and they duplicate what one another is doing, and they don't achieve the maximum in efficiency, but that's the way they do it.
Could you give an example? Which states have this kind of law system?
Yeah, Michigan's a pretty good example, although there are campuses that are part of the University of Michigan. Alabama is another one, and they ended up with 3 campuses in the state capital. And there were only 200,000 people living in the state capital. But in the belief that by being proximate to the state capital, they would have access to resources. It doesn't work. But it does work when institutions are very entrepreneurial, and they can leapfrog other institutions with, if they have major gifts and they have entrepreneurial leaders. I mean, it isn't a stable arrangement, in my judgment, as I observe the states where it's everyone for themselves, every man for themselves. Is an unstable kind of environment. You can't really do much in the way of prediction. At the other extreme is the master plan in California that was enacted in 1960. And that, of course, as you all know, Clark Kerr was an absolute genius, politically as well as academically. Although, as you may remember, he was fired during the time that Ronald Reagan was governor of the state of California. One of his famous sayings when he came out from the closed session with the board at which he had been terminated, the press asked him about it, and he said, "I leave as I came, fired with enthusiasm." But he was a genius, and he negotiated with the California State University chancellor a deal in which UC was the only institution that could confer the PhD, and that the students that they would serve would have to come out of the top 1/8 of the graduating class. So they got the smartest kids and the only pass to offer the PhD. And it achieved stability and clarity. And it was at a time when California was just growing like gangbusters. And it worked. And everybody got better and everybody got bigger. Over time, what it revealed is that some campuses in the CSU system had faculty and capacities to do research and advanced degrees, but they were prevented from doing so unless they could do it through a UC campus. And the track record there, as you might expect, was not very positive, very difficult to offer a PhD through a UC campus when the faculty came from a different campus. So I think it would be fair to say, if you were to evaluate at a later point you would reach the conclusion that a couple of the UC campuses do not have as high a quality offerings as a couple of the CSU campuses. Because when you put this in statute, you can't anticipate the organic growth and change that happens in a state, that happens in regions, in ways that you never envisioned. And so I think that is the story, as I see it, from the University of California. For many years, it worked very well, and it provided stability, and it staved off this kind of unhealthy competition. The future, of course, of the University of California is now, and that whole system is very much on the table, because the cuts from the state have been so draconian that they have had to dramatically increase tuition. You've read about the protests from students and from families on the increases in tuition. It remains to be seen. It is, for all of us in higher education, a source of great sadness that what is arguably the finest public university in the world is being, in a sense, brought to its knees. Now, to be totally objective about it, I think it would be fair to say that they had enough money that it was possible for every one of those campuses to operate very independently. They had enough money that they didn't have to choose paths that were more productive or less costly. And Mark Yudof, to his great credit, is embarking on a major effort, and this will not be easy to pull off, but in a time like this, where the financial crisis is as great as it is the moment when you can make changes in a magnitude that might have otherwise been unthinkable in other times. But they will eliminate all of the administrative systems across the entire university and replace with a single system that will do all the routine back of the office. You know, we grow up, at least in the U.S., and we think colleges and universities can do everything better than anybody else can do. So we know how to run food service, we know how to run bookstores, we know how to do building. I mean, we are experts in everything. And what I think Mark is trying to do is conserve the maximum resources for the things that are mission critical, the faculty and the degree programs, and turn everything else into a hard-nosed assessment of how we can deliver the services at the lowest cost, even if it means changing the way we have been doing payroll or accounting, or, you know, pick your topic.
Is promoting some campuses at the expense of others in the plan also? Berkeley versus Santa Cruz?
No, not so far. Not so far. The effort is to try to reduce costs for administrative functions on every single campus by replacing their individual systems with a unified system. They think they can save $500 million over a 5-year period of time. So it's a pretty significant effort. And the middle ground, of course, is this system-level governance, where when events change and organic growth and development occurs, you are able to respond to it without diminishing your rigor of quality, and that allows you to avoid unnecessary duplication. So let me talk just a little bit about that. Maybe the best example is the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And as this story shows, it was a 2-year college for much of its life. It became a 4-year institution and joined the university in 1961. But Charlotte has become the largest city in North Carolina and the #2 banking center in the nation. When Bank of America, First National, and Wachovia all had their headquarters in Charlotte, TIAA, CREF, our retirement organization, has a huge operation in Charlotte. It became a major financial center for the nation. And it had a very modest university. Well, the evidence was very compelling that this was a place that, although you couldn't have envisioned this in the 60s or 70s or even the 80s, but when you got into the 90s and into the turn of the century, that now was the time to invest in creating for this large city and great financial capital the quality of universities. So it's in the process of escalating both in size and in quality as a graduate and research institution. So it's one of the two emerging research universities. We have two established research universities and two that are emerging. The one that is emerging most rapidly is at UNC Charlotte.
Is it competitive with Japanese, for example, or
not yet? Not yet. I mean, Chapel Hill's been around for 215 years. So it's going to be a long time before, but it's offering programs with a different slant and a different orientation. It's getting the investment. It's not out ahead of its headlights. It's going to grow into a better and better and better university with every passing year. But it wouldn't come close to Charlotte if they were going, or to Chapel Hill if they were competing head to head.
But would you, as a president, protect the status of Chapel Hill versus Charlotte, for example? Because you need to make such choice.
Oh, yes. Chapel Hill is the crown in the university. And to destroy or diminish that or to permit it to happen would have impacts for generations to come. So
even in the name of equity, like say, I need to distribute the funds equally or in such a way.
Equity, in my experience, is in the eye of the beholder. And sometimes you can't have it all. But if you were choosing, if they were comparable, choosing between Chapel Hill and Charlotte, you would have to choose Chapel Hill to protect what is the core strength of the entire university, the mothership, as we call it. But when Chapel Hill or North Carolina State tried to prevent Charlotte from ever getting a PhD program, I stepped in and said, no, we're going to evaluate theirs on the same basis we would evaluate yours. I only have two more visuals, so let me work my way through it, and then we'll have a good opportunity for discussion. And some of this I have already mentioned to you. In some states, the systems have also been dissolved. So there are cases where they get built and cases where they get dissolved as events, politics, and circumstances change. I've emphasized already that the secret sauce in all of this, from my perspective, is achieving the right balance between quality and aspirations coming from inside the institution, from the faculty, meeting an appropriate need. And it is that combination where those can be brought together to meet that makes the most sense to place an investment. I wanted to pick up on one of the themes that Neil mentioned, because sometimes you have to reach out not only from within the varying needs of your own system, but to reach out to others. One of the things I did when I arrived at the university was to do an assessment of the needs going forward, and I uncovered a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance. The laboratories were inadequate for 21st century science. The classrooms were, in some cases, disgraceful. I did an enrollment forecast. We were going to grow dramatically, and we didn't have space to accommodate them. So we ended up doing engineering analysis of 800 and some buildings across the university and concluded that we needed a huge amount of capital investment to completely recapitalize the university. And so I went to the legislature and said, I think we need $6 billion over the next 15 years. And I'd like to ask you to give us half of it, $3 billion. No university had ever done anything coming close to that magnitude. It has many political chapters that I won't go into. They were afraid to take it on their own responsibility, but ultimately I asked them to pass legislation giving me the authority to take it to a vote of the people. So I went to the community colleges, which are everywhere, and invited them to become part of our bond initiative. And of the $3.1 billion, I allocated $500 million to them. And they joined in the campaign effort to pass this bond. They wouldn't have gotten the $500 million because they're funded locally. So this was a huge benefit to them, but it helped us reach out to every part of the state. Now, the smart money, as we say, said there's no way you can do this in North Carolina. No one has ever done $3.1 billion. Now, I had run a few bond campaigns in California, so I knew how to do it, just weren't quite as big as we tried to do in North Carolina. So I raised money privately to run a campaign, and I think we ran a great campaign. And I got a few of the key political leaders to express their support. I don't know whether any of you recognize the name Jesse Helms, but Jesse Helms hardly ever supported anything from the university, except when I needed help on visas, because he was ranking on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he solved that problem. I built a personal relationship with Jesse Helms. And one day he invited me and the members of the North Carolina congressional delegation to lunch in the beautiful Foreign Relations Committee room on Capitol Hill in the Capitol. And I just thought this was great. I showed up, they all showed up. And he opened up the lunch by saying, I've invited all of you here for lunch today because I think we should be supportive of Molly's bonds. You could have knocked me over with a feather. But I can tell you, having Jesse Helms endorse these bonds made a huge difference in major portions of North Carolina. Anyway, a good campaign, lots of luck. I think an effective strategy to build consensus and to get people from different perspectives on board. The smart money said there's no way you can do it. It passed in all 100 counties, with 3 out of 4 voters having approved it. It's a great example of how when the stars are aligned, as we would say, you can pull off even the biggest of higher education goals. So let me wrap up by talking about what I think are the great advantages that you have. I have seen them. I have heard them in the course of this week. I have read about them. I know that this may be a uncertain or maybe even troubling time, but you have so many advantages to leverage and to use to advance your larger goals. And you have done so throughout a very difficult history. Jewish people have placed an enormous value on learning throughout. Creativity and academic achievement have always been important to the Jewish people. You have tremendous internal advantages. And as I noted, economic success of such a small nation with comparatively few natural resources and with such profound challenges on the security front is really nothing short of astounding of what has been accomplished. In Israel, as perhaps nowhere else, the drive and the creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit, the determination of your people really is your economy. It is the foundation for what you have today and what will be your future. Your students come to you much more mature after having completed their military service. They come to you stress-tested in a way our kids, come and they've been pampered. They have moms and dads that we call helicopter parents because they hover over their children all the while they're in college. They expect spas so they can get good exercise. I mean, when I think about the advantages of having stress-tested and somewhat mature and yet still flexible young people, you have a tremendous advantage. And because you value learning as much as you do, I just think your future is extraordinarily bright. I want to be clear that while I see many advantages to the American-style university system, I want to be perfectly clear. This is not my intent to try to sell this. I have no idea whether this kind of approach fits for you. Neil asked me to talk about the array of governance, what I think from my experience works and what doesn't work, and my goal here today has been to share with you what I have seen over many decades in higher education in the U.S. But in no way am I suggesting that I even begin to know enough to advise you about what would be the best for Israel. Thank you, and I'm now happy to
My name is Yaakov Bergman. In a lecture that President Emeritus of the University of California, David Gardner, gave in 2005, he listed 8 principles that make the University of California the successful higher education organization that it is. One of the 8 principles is, and I'm quoting from his lecture, the steady and diligent commitment to the concept of the University of California as a single university operating on 10 campuses. The university is a single corporate entity. It is governed by a single board of regents possessing nearly unqualified constitutional authority. There is one president appointed by the regents to whom sufficient authority is given to exercise the whole system's central executive authority. The budgeted funds are allocated within the 10 campuses university by this president. The University of North Carolina is governed in a similar way, and I'm quoting from the UNC website. The UNC Board of Governors is the policy-making body legally charged with the general determination, control, supervision, management, and governance of all affairs of the constituent institutions. It elects the president who administers the university. So my question comes here. Would you agree, President Emeritus Broad, with President Emeritus Gardner, that this principle of a multi-campus single university is essential for the success of your respective institutions? So this is the first question, and I should comment that some people advance the notion that Israel should go into a system of the University of Israel in the same way. Now, my second question is, I noticed that none of the 32 members of the Board of Governors of the University of North Carolina is from its faculty. The same is true of the boards of trustees of the 17 institutions comprising the University of North Carolina. And my question is, why don't you have faculty members neither on the board of governors of the UNC nor on the boards of trustees of the 17 institutions? Is this intended?
Yes, it is intended by our legislature in North Carolina that there shall not be faculty serving on the Board of Trustees.
Can you elaborate?
I have lived in universities where faculty have served and on the board, and in universities where faculty have not. It is my judgment that if the decision in North Carolina was one that could be made by the university rather than the legislature, there would have been a faculty or more than one faculty member serving on the board. But the legislature was simply unwilling to consider that, nor are they willing to consider a student in a voting capacity. We have one student. The student cannot vote.
But the same structure is true of other state systems, like the University of California and Michigan.
Absolutely. But in North Carolina, we had a very active faculty senate. And they played a tremendous role and had a significant influence on the work of the board because they helped shape the policy recommendations that came up through the board.
Can they override the president's decision? I mean, the Senate.
Can the board?
No, the Senate.
No. No. But it would be very rare in which a recommendation coming from the Senate would be overturned by the president. Rare indeed. We'd usually be smart enough to be working with them to make sure that by the time the recommendation came out, we were prepared to praise it and endorse it.
Can you say something about the first question?
Well, I would say this. I do believe that the University of North Carolina stands in a stronger position today than it would otherwise have been because of the consolidation and the creation of a system. And even the folks who are still living, who opposed it to begin with, the final step occurred in 1961, would have to agree that it is a finer university today because it has been able to accomplish goals collectively that could not be accomplished individually. Chapel Hill, as much as it is revered in North Carolina, could not have passed that bond, or even a fraction of the amount that was passed. It was because it impacted every single part of the state. And I think California feels they're better off. I put my one reservation about putting the structure in statute when you can't anticipate what the future needs will be. But I'm confident that California feels that they created the finest public university in the world as a result of what happened in the development of the master plan. Whether it would work in Israel, I leave to you to determine.
Let me just comment that the OECD committee, when it reviewed the Israeli system, it recommended against putting such barriers between the layers, like between the research universities and the colleges, saying that it would stifle competition. So this is consistent with what you were saying. So that meaning, everything should be open for competition, but true competition.
True.
Alex Kenan. I'd like to ask how appointments are made in your system. I mean, are the appointments basically elected or appointed?
The president, you mean?
The president and the different presidents of the university.
Okay. The president of the system is selected by a committee of the board, And it is customary in the U.S. now almost universally that a board will retain an executive search consultant whose job it is to find candidates who might not be paying attention to the ads that this position is open, would go and recruit individuals who are doing perfectly fine in the job they're in, weren't thinking of making a move, but to persuade them to come and meet with the board. And then the board makes ultimately the selection. When it comes to the campus chancellors, the president creates a search committee from the campus, including representatives from the faculty and a couple of their advisory board members, again, typically using an executive search firm. And then I would bring a recommendation to the big board for the appointment of the chancellor. So the president really is, and that's very important when, you know, the table of chancellors are all individuals that you appointed to those posts. You have a loyalty that is built in that comes from having done all of this work side by side. So that's how it works in North Carolina. And I think it's how it works at UC. I think the board only sees the president's recommendation.
And how about the deans, provost, the deans? They are not elected by the faculty.
No, they are not elected by the faculty. Although the faculty voice is obviously very important, and both department chairs and deans are up for regular review every 3 to 5 years. And if there's faculty dissatisfaction, they are not renewed. I mean, the faculty voice is heard. It's just that the faculty don't get to make the selection. Yes, please.
You mentioned something about fundraising, and I want to understand. Now, you said in your system, University of North Carolina, each campus has its own fundraising operation.
Yes.
Did I get it correctly?
Yes.
I mean, so how does it work? I mean, within a system where
it did work.
not
Because before the system...
no, nowadays. I understand that now they also have their own.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So how does it work? I mean, don't they clash with each other? I mean, after all, North Carolina is not such a big state.
It works very well because the heart of the fundraising is from their alumni. So the alumni loyalty is to the campus where they earned their bachelor's degree. So that's the heart of the fundraising effort. Now, is it the case that multiple campuses will go to a corporate foundation or to one of the other large foundations? Yeah, but it's a competitive process, and we know those foundations are going to award grants to the places that have the best ideas, or the ideas that are best aligned with the goals of the foundation. So, yes, it's a competitive process.
Do you have a say in it? I mean, the central system, the president of the university?
Only rarely. This is one thing about which I think the campus chancellors are appropriately jealous, and that is to the records of the students and the alumni that were part of that institution. And I would very rarely ask to have the records of the entire university. So only in instances like the bond where I went out and raised the money for the campaign. Otherwise, I was not active as a fundraiser while I was president of the university. I'm very active now at ACE, but I was not active then.
How do you reconcile Ephraim Yar, APR, from Tel Aviv University? How do you reconcile between the fact that the oldest universities, of course, have a larger pool and probably also richer pool of alumni that can make the donations. And between this and the American sense of justice, particularly if you want to encourage the development of newer colleges and universities, including research universities such as the one in Charlotte, if they don't have the amount of donations that the Chapel Hill and the other two campuses on this holy triangle are getting.
You know, competition is wired in the DNA of Americans. And there's nothing quite like competition to bring out the best in everyone. And so, all in due course, Charlotte will figure out how to develop their fundraising. What I did was give them a healthy start, bringing in some consultants and helping them hire the first people. Fundraising is not rocket science. It's not linear, but it's not rocket science. And it won't happen overnight, but UNC Charlotte will be, in 20 years, I feel very confident, will be raising as much money as Chapel Hill is.
Just a comment. Just a comment.
I can
working? Yes. Meir Tzadok. I just happened to be in the mid-'80s at Berkeley when Clark Kerr wrote his book, Presidents Make a Difference. And I mean, just listening to you, I guess he would probably have envisioned someone like you, because all the time we talked about technicalities, structures, governance, and so on. There's always the personal ambition and the personal sometimes features of the one who leads the system. And certainly in universities, at least his book shows that president of universities can make a difference in spite of sometimes all sorts of governing methods. Okay. Okay, now it's okay. Just a comment, not an observation, that's all. Well, I mean, what you described with the bond is certainly something was very creative and certainly was different from at least what I had or what I'm familiar with in the States. Certainly.
Right.
Thank you.
So leadership always makes a difference, right? In any organization, and having passion and knowledge also makes a difference. So for those of us that have been privileged to have higher education as our life's work, we know that the university was founded on values. It wouldn't be enduring for decades and centuries. I mean, it's, other than the church, it's the oldest organization in the history of the world, founded on a set of values and the kind of organization that truly transforms the life. You get to see that transformation in the lives of the students. And so I think higher education is not just a job. You have the opportunity to feel that you are part of something much bigger than you, and that you may be a small link in a chain that extends over decades and centuries. And I think reminding ourselves of the great privilege of serving in the academy is something that helps us when we find ourselves in the tough times.
Let me just make a counter comment for the record, that leadership without vested authority is not that useful. So you need a structure, in any organization. You need management, you need accountability, and you need authority. But let me ask the following about the budget allocation by the president. How does a president of such a system allocate the budget between the different institutions? And one would guess that different chancellors would come and try to negotiate a bigger portion of the budget to his or her own institution. What is the process? Can you shortly describe what is going on?
Well, of course, there's many factors that go into making the ultimate allocation to the campuses. When I arrived at the University of North Carolina, there was a simple funding formula that for every student you got so many $1,000. Didn't matter whether they were studying engineering or studying philosophy. And it didn't matter whether they were undergraduate or PhD. And so we launched a very analytical effort and built a matrix that had disciplinary cost differences and level between the lower division, upper division, master's, and PhD. And we were successful in selling that to the legislature.
So it goes by formula?
The enrollment goes by formula. And so the PhD gets 9 to 11 times what goes to, and this was a very important way to support Chapel Hill because it had the really high cost PhD programs.
Research output?
Does
it count in the formula? Research output?
No, because very few dollars come from the state for research. The research comes from the national competition.
Since this session, I guess, is coming close to an end, I would like to ask a question about North Carolina as such, rather than about North Carolina as a whole, rather than as a state, rather than the institution of higher education. And, you know, when I first visited your beautiful state in the mid-60s, and I just crossed the border, I came from the north, and the first scene that I saw was a car, and in front of it a flag with the title, "I am a rebel." I wonder if I would come to Chapel Hill or to any of the other parts of the country, would I still encounter this kind of flags?
You would not encounter Confederate flags in North Carolina, if that's what you're referring to. North Carolina is proud of its progressive character. And there is a profound difference between, say, North Carolina and South Carolina on this regard. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this.